Hey friends, welcome to But What If You Did, the podcast where we share the empowering, encouraging stories from millennials thriving in the messy transitional seasons of life. I'm your host, Allison, and I'm a millennial on a mission to show you what's possible when you stop playing it safe and lean into those uncomfortable growth seasons in life. These conversations are literal proof that you too can go from surviving to thriving. It's about building what I call your mindset toolkit and taking action even when it feels hard. And well, on that note, time is our most valuable resource. So grab some coffee and let's get to today's conversation. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of But What If You Did? I'm Allison, and well, you may have noticed that I chose not to release an episode last week. This was the first time in almost a year that I chose to not put out an episode, but honestly, there were just a lot of little dominoes that fell last week, and it really just wasn't feasible given the circumstances. So practicing giving myself some grace as I continue to learn to navigate these new programs and new processes, and well, I'm just really excited to be back this week with another really great conversation to share. Today, I sit down with Alyssa Benjamin, host of the Our Nature podcast. I was introduced to Alyssa's podcast, which focuses on connecting back to our natural world a couple months ago, and I can honestly say that I look forward to every single episode. It is hands down one of the most calming and relaxing podcasts I listen to, and it has certainly inspired me to make more of a conscious effort to connect back to the natural world when things feel hard. In today's conversation, Alyssa shares how connecting back to the natural world has helped her to find an inner stability and inner resilience that can weather any storm. We talk about how you too can learn to cultivate an inner sense of calm and joy, and Alyssa shares a bit about her newest and upcoming offering designed specifically for people navigating transitions. This conversation was honestly one of those good for the soul conversations, and I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to share with all of you. So on that note, I hope you'll grab some coffee and let's get to today's conversation with Alyssa. All right, friends, welcome back. If this is your first time here, I am so excited that you decided to join us today. If you are a returner, thank you so much for coming to spend more time with us. I know you have a lot of podcasts to choose from, and I'm grateful that you came to spend some time with me. So without further ado, let's get to today's conversation. Today, I'm sitting down with Alyssa Benjamin. Welcome to the show, Alyssa.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm really excited to have you. So on this podcast, we share the stories of millennials that have gone through messy transition seasons in life and found their way through it and maybe have some tips and tricks for how to continue to navigate the messy seasons. And I know you've been through a number of transitions and have some interesting perspective on transitions in life. So I'd love to dive into a little bit of your story.
Yeah, totally. I feel like life is a series of transitions with maybe periods of calm in between. But I think if you're someone who is interested and invested in your own growth and your own journey and your own happiness and fulfillment, you'll always be sort of in some form of transition. At least that's been my experience. So, yeah.
So let's take it back to, millennials kind of went through two pretty pivotal timeframes where I feel like kind of shaped where we are today and how we move forward. So those two events were 9/11, which for most of us hit sometime while we were in high school or just out of high school. And the other was the financial crash, which for many of us with our first couple of years in the job force. So I'd love to go back to where your story starts around those.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, I think as a generation, those two periods of time really shaped the way that myself and I know many other people have navigated their careers and their lives. I think for many 9/11 was the end of a form of innocence for a lot of people, and it was false, but this false sense of stability and protection. And as a child of baby boomers, I think so much of what the environment that I grew up in was sort of, my parents had parents that went through multiple wars and a lot of trauma. And so my parents, being baby boomers, really wanted to shower me with, everything and sort of oversaturate my world to protect me. But the reality is, just like life, that's, that sense of like stability and safety is false in a way. And so I think that's why 9/11 was such a shock, because we had built all these man-made systems that were supposed to protect all of us. And I think, again, our parents, being baby boomers, had wanted to create this like cocoon of protection. And in some ways spoiled us. Like, I think there's a spoiling that happened, and it all went away in an instant. And I think for me, I think around 14 at the time, or even maybe 13, must have been 14, 2011. And I was old enough to understand that I was old enough to understand the complexity of the situation, and young enough to have it make a huge impression. Because that's such a pivotal time when you're like coming
Right.
into your own, coming into your adolescence, and coming into your independence from your parents, and figuring out what you want. And so to have something like that was so unfathomable to so many people happen, it really shook my sense of what I could rely on. And I think that happened for many people. So that was September 11th. And then, yes, the financial crisis. I had just graduated from college at the time. It was 2009. And I remember I graduated from a really good school. I went to Boston University. I had internships, all throughout every summer throughout my time there. And I was amongst so many bright, successful, smart, well, I guess successful in their own way, smart individuals. And I looked around, and I think out of maybe 20 of my friends, one person had a job. And for me, I didn't have a job, but I had what was considered a paid internship. So I graduated with my degree. I think it was like $65,000 a year to go to Boston University, something insane. And I was getting paid $12 an hour for this internship. And I felt like I was lucky, because so many people had nothing, had no jobs. And at least I had something. And so I was living in like subsidized housing on campus, because I was actually working at Boston University in the sustainability department. So I was working at the Office of Sustainability, kind of starting it for the university, which was really cool. And I did that for, it seemed like a summer, but I think it was longer. Maybe it was like a year. I don't know. I thought it was a summer. I maybe tried to like condense that timeline. But then I ended up moving home with my parents. Because I didn't have a job. Yes. So eventually, whether it was 6 months or a year and a half, I forget how long it was. It was long. I think it was a year and a half, actually. And it finally came to an end. And I didn't have enough money to stay I was in Boston at the time. And so I had applied to this job at Eileen Fisher, the clothing brand. I don't know if you know it. It's like a women's clothing brand. And the application process took 6 months. And so in that 6-month period of like applying and interviewing, I didn't know if I was going to get it. And I kind of put all my eggs in that basket. I was like, I really felt like if I don't get this job, like, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Right.
And so I was still waiting to hear about the job in that 6-month period. And I moved out of Boston and moved back home with my parents. And luckily, that only lasted 1 month, because a month into my time living at home, and I fully gave up. I was like, I surrender. This is my new life. And my parents were retired at the time. So they were like loving it, because they had,
you were home.
Yeah. Yep. They were like, oh, they could put all their focus back on me. But a month into that, I did find out that I got the job. So that's when I moved to New York.
There's a lot to unpack from just that alone. I mean, I think first of all, how we all lost our sense of stability. Like, I go back to thinking about 9/11, and I know exactly where I was sitting. I was in my homeroom my freshman year in high school, and I remember them turning on the TV and then being like, oh, maybe we should turn this off. Maybe this is not a good thing to be watching at school. And I lived in Connecticut at the time, so we were very close. We had a lot of friends who had parents that were firefighters and EMTs and stuff that were all going down to the city and trying to help and whatever. But I don't remember taking airline flights. Like, I grew up going to family vacations where we flew all the time, but I don't remember life before having TSA security to check every single thing. And so when you brought up the point about stability, I'm like, it's so interesting because that definitely was a pivotal moment for so many of us where I just hadn't really thought about it in that context of how that really taught us that the world was not as stable as our 14-year-old brains maybe thought it was at that point. That was our first time that we had that like earth-shattering experience that it was like, oh, we've lived in our safe little bubbles of our hometown where things have felt very cookie cutter, very what you expect them to be, very much what your parents tell you it should be up until that point. And I think that was the first time that it kind of rocked our world. And then from a, heading into college perspective, I think that just speaks to how many of us entered the job market severely underpaid for the amount of student debt that we had taken on. I went to school in Rhode Island, and while it was definitely not the tuition prices of like Boston University, my first internship out of college paid $8.50 an hour, and I thought that was good at the time, like you said, because I was employed and had a job, whereas most of my friends that didn't leave for internships before they graduated and whatnot, like they were all unemployed and moving back in with their parents and sitting there for 2+ years. So I think it's very much a story of the time that so many of us experience that. And I think we often don't think about how that's maybe shaped our trajectories as adults and finding our way as adults.
It 100% has, because I think our parents' generation, it felt like we grew up being told that this is your path. Mm-hmm. You go to college, you work hard in college, then you get a corporate job, then you work hard at your corporate job, then you get, a pension, whatever, then you like retire and you get all this money. And it was communicated to us like that was guaranteed. And so I think it was a huge shock when it was like, oh, wait, this isn't guaranteed.
No.
This is the whole world that we thought was going to be this one way is not this way. So I think whether it was conscious or not, I think a lot of this was unconscious and subconscious. But I think a lot of people, a lot of millennials in that time period, at that critical time when they were graduating, especially if you're, I'm 33 now. So I think me and my friends who are around that same age are considered like the middle point of the millennial, time span. So if you graduated around that time, that was so true for you because what you thought was going to happen didn't.
Yep.
And so I think that bled into how I started to see so many of my friends bounce around from company to company in a way that the other generation hadn't, because people just were kind of like, well, I can't trust that a company is going to look out for me because it's so unstable. Who knows? So I got to look out for me. And I think that's why we were called the me generation. And it's not, I think there's a misconception about, I think there were a lot of opinions about what the me generation meant, but I think the reality was the circumstances created a need to focus on yourself and your needs because that was what at least I needed to do to navigate this unpredictable time.
I think there are two paths. I think there are the people that, like you said, they bounced around position to position with different companies because, like you said, they saw right off the bat, they're not going to protect me. They're not going to whatever. I'm going to keep looking for the next step. But then I think you also saw a path where many of us, went into these larger corporations, saw that there was room to move around within corporations and kind of followed that more common trajectory that our boomer parents had kind of pushed for of like, put in your time. If you work hard, the promotion will come. And that's just not the reality of how things are anymore. And I think it's almost the reverse for millennials. We're now experiencing that people don't actually like when they see that you've stayed in the same place for too long because they feel like you're not growing and evolving and doing all of these other things. And so I think that that's kind of impacted us in a lot of different ways too. So I know when we had previously talked, something that we had really touched on was that we kind of have to learn as a generation to accept this we're at the stage that we're at mentality, right? Because I think sometimes it's really easy for us to be like, we see this peer being successful here, or this person doing this here, or this person's getting married, or this person's having kids. And we are so impacted by the external circumstances that are around us. And so I think that there's a lot to be said for, first of all, to move forward, you kind of have to make peace with where you're at. But then also, we see so much of our generation giving away our power to the boomers that are still leading the workforce but are getting ready to retire, or, to all of these external resources that we think are just going to magically fix our problems rather than turning introspective and being a little more reflective on what's going on. So what advice do you have for millennials that are maybe in that transitional stage where they feel just really stuck where they are, but are kind of grasping at resources right now, hoping that something is magically going to be the key that kind of unlocks this for them?
To your point of like, people are where they're at. It's an answer that sometimes needs to be experienced rather than intellectualized. So I'm thinking about your listeners, and if someone's hearing this and thinking, well, yeah, that's fine, but if I had a job that I liked and if I had a lot of money, I would be happier. There is some truth to that. I would say if you are in a state of like survival and that stress of just like of basic needs being covered is not is overwhelming, and you can't actually cover your basic needs, and you're in that kind of fight or flight survival mode, that's really real. I'm not saying like okay, we'll find the happiness within. However, I would also say that even if you are in that survival mode, there are moments when you can touch that inner peace and calm. It's not easy to do, and it takes a lot of finding the tools to create a contemplative practice, to create a mindful practice, to bring meditation and moments of pause and moments of spaciousness in your mind and moments of separation from your own, the sort of running tape of your own thoughts, which are not you. But it's possible, but it's a lot harder. So I'm not really speaking to those who are like right in, extreme survival mode, because if our basic needs aren't being met, we don't have the luxury to be able to think about all of these other things. I'm talking to people who are more feeling like they're stuck and that there's something. They're kind of looking around, and maybe they have a job that they're really not happy in. Maybe I'm talking to you, Allison. And it's like, is this it?
Right.
Is this it?
Is there more?
Like, we go to our job and we make some money, and then we're supposed to like buy, take our money and buy all these things to like fulfill us. But every time we do, it never really seems to fulfill us. So then we think, well, if we just had that other job or that other relationship or that other body or that other, look, then we would be happier. But then we realize that that's not true. I'm talking to those people.
I have a friend that often says, like, where you are now is where you wanted to be 2 years ago, and to like really remember to sink in and let yourself be proud of the fact that you got to this point. Because I think we also, as a generation, we're largely taught that like you should always be shooting for the next step or shooting for the 5 steps ahead. And I think sometimes we get very wrapped up in this idea of, if it's not moving fast enough, that there has to be a way to make it move faster and that we can buy that way. And I think some of that goes back to what you said earlier, is that as a generation, our parents did kind of do that helicopter parenting thing where they spoiled us and they wanted to make it to protect us from all of these bad things. But in a way, I think it kind of reinforced for us that we could buy our own happiness. And I think we are now heading, as we're in our early 30s, late 20s for some millennials, maybe even into their late 30s, we're starting to see that that's not actually true. And that working 70 hours a week so that you had the money to buy those things wasn't actually fulfilling when you bought the thing. It just made you want more money, which was just causing you more stress. So I think we're starting to see the domino effects of that. And I think the pandemic kind of taught us to pull back the curtain on our own lives of, oh, this is what I thought was really important. And maybe this wasn't what was so important after all. And I think that goes back to that like fight for that inner stability and maybe even a little bit of, as you've said before, that inner resilience to try to grasp how to find that sense of calm and joy and just really the thing that makes us us inside of us rather than this like external world that we were so accustomed to trying to please.
It's all about sovereignty. I mean, we talk as millennials, we're the me generation. We had the curtain, as you said, pulled back a bunch of times. The first when we were quite young. And now is, in some ways, it's a gift because we have an opening and an invitation to connect to something really real. And in that connection, change the consciousness of future generations and the world. I mean, imagine the millennials are now, we're all having kids, and imagine how this generation will raise their kids. Hopefully with a deeper sense of what really is fulfillment. And it's nothing that comes outside of you. So that's my optimism and my hope.
Yes, I share the same optimism. And I talk a little bit on my podcast outro that plays about how like we are a generation that I feel like is very full of change makers. And I think we're starting to see this big change wave kind of sweeping the generation of like, okay, this wasn't working, but now instead of sitting on the sidelines of our life, we're kind of taking that more active role. And I think some of this comes with like just even the mass amounts of social injustice that we've seen over the last year, right? Of like, we saw that we were sitting on the sidelines and not taking an active step. And now if we take an active step, but I also think that we're sitting in this unique position to really influence the next generation and to truly make the world a better place from doing so as a result of the life lessons we've learned. So, something that I experienced for the first time with the pandemic was just these really heavy feelings of anxiety and having panic attacks and kind of dealing with more depressive feelings. And as somebody that had never really struggled with mental health, that was a new journey for me to navigate. What I'm seeing largely is that a lot of millennials are still kind of sitting in that. Things are getting better, but like we're all still in a rocky, hard season right now. We've talked before about how your podcast, Our Nature, is about connecting back to the natural world around you and how really using nature to connect back can be really helpful in terms of like helping you to manage maybe your anxiety and some of that. I would love to dive into a little bit about how you became curious about that.
Yeah. Well, this is my favorite topic to talk about. So I'm so happy you asked about it. I can relate to what you mentioned. I mean, my journey to this work was really, I was called to it because I was searching for answers. And we talked about that question of like looking around and being like, is this it?
Right.
And I had been striving for the job and the career. And I thought I was going to run a big corporation someday and be like the CEO. That was my dream. I mean, talk about like, that's the epitome of like external validation. And I was in that, I was on that path, and something inside of me felt like there was something more and there was something missing. And I had been struggling with periods of depression. I had gone through, I think, more than I've definitely gone through periods of depression. more than depression, I had gone through long periods of anxiety. Anxiety is something that has, continually plagued my life. And I started to notice a pattern that every time I went for a walk at the time I was living in New York City for about 10 years. And I lived near the Hudson River. So I would go and take a walk to the river. And every time I would do that, and I would just be connected to the water, and I would be connected to the birds and look at the sky and feel the breeze in my, feel the breeze against my skin, I started to feel better. Or any time that I would garden for a few hours, I would feel better. Anytime I would visit my aunt in Maine who lived in a more rural, nature-filled place, I would feel better. And I started to it's almost like breadcrumbs. I started to feel like, well, I'm just going to go towards what makes me feel better. And the common theme in all that was nature. And another thing I began to notice, I was really on my own spiritual journey as well. And I was reading a lot of self-help books, and I was reading a lot of spiritual books, and I was listening to a lot of podcasts about spirituality and about growth. And I was just on this almost a detective mission at the time, gathering information and figuring out what felt true to me. And I also noticed a pattern that I remember I was like a diehard fan of Oprah's Super Soul podcast. I don't know if you have listened to that.
No, I haven't.
Well, I love Oprah. That's something I am very vocal about, although I haven't really talked about it that much. But I talked about it on my podcast. But I love Oprah. I love her. I love her so much. I think everything she does is brilliant. And she had this series called Super Soul Conversations. And at the end of her series, she asked her guests a series of questions. Or at the end of each episode, she asked her guests a series of questions. And one of her questions, in a very Oprah way, she'd say, where do you find God? Or where is God? Or something of that nature. I hope, it's probably not verbatim. But she'd ask that. She'd ask these she'd say what is the soul? She'd ask these very pointed questions, as only Oprah can, to these incredible spiritual teachers. And 90% of the time, they would say nature. I find God in nature. And something about that, I was like, well, here I am looking for answers. Here I am feeling a ton of anxiety and struggling with my mental health. And I've experienced how much better I feel when I'm in nature. And I also have all these spiritual leaders talking about how that's where they find God. That's where they connect. So I'm like, there's something to this. And I just turned myself towards it. And my whole life changed.
I have noticed most recently, as I've started to realize what it looks like to connect back to nature, that anytime I have felt anxious or just out of my element, trying to turn to okay, maybe I just need to go for a walk outside, or maybe I need to take my sketch pad and just go sit and just aimlessly draw outside, and to reinfuse that creativity into sitting with nature and just listening to the birds. Or if being outside isn't an option, looking for podcasts that are nature driven. Kate Flanders does a podcast, Adventures in Opting Out, where she's in Canada and she literally records every episode walking outside. So you can hear nature around her in every episode. So if you don't have the option to be outside, there are other resources to kind of help you connect back to that.
I just want to touch on something that you said about, access to the outdoors. And, you said if we can't go outside, I would say access is a real thing. Many of us have the privilege to live in a space where we have parks that we can go to, and we have maybe, our house is oriented in a way that's close to a natural space. But some of us in certain communities don't have that. Maybe the park that we don't have a park nearby, or maybe the park that we live near isn't safe or doesn't feel like it is for us. Or there are some areas where, I mean, as a Black individual, there are many places in this country where Black people don't feel safe to go outside because they might be harassed or, so that's a real reality. However, I would also say that no matter where you are, you can touch nature. Even if you live in, a very urban space, you can always step outside and you can look at a blade of grass, even if it's popping up through the cracks of a sidewalk. You can look up at the sky and connect with the clouds. You can look at the pigeons in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, we are nature too. So in connecting with other people, you are connecting with nature. And so I just want to mention that because I think that that's really important. That's something that I really speak to in my podcast of nature is all around us and it's within us. So we can connect from wherever we're at. I don't believe there's one person who doesn't have an opportunity in some way to connect with our physical nature. So, yeah, I just want to invite people to get creative and get curious because nature is right there for you. You just need to be looking for it.
I feel like before this last year, we didn't really hear people talk a lot about why it was so important to be curious, which I know is like a weird thing because I feel like it's very much a buzzword in the personal development space right now. But I think there's so much to be said for listening to these gut feelings that you maybe have of like, okay, you're feeling anxious and okay, really thinking about like what makes you really happy or what could make you feel better right now and maybe exploring that a little bit because I know for me, what makes me happy sometimes it's like you said, like it's as simple as just going for a walk. And rather than being like, well, I don't have time to go for a walk right now, taking 10 minutes and just listening and seeing how that helps you to connect back to the world around you rather than racing through the world around you.
Yeah. I mean, the profound is in the pause.
Yes, it certainly is. I'm like, yep, and I'm not so great at pausing, but I'm getting better at it. So something that I've noticed over the last year that I've had a number of mindset shifts that have kind of helped me to navigate when things felt especially sticky or hard. One of them was several weeks ago when one of my guests was talking about finding the life lesson in everything. And that was like the pivotal mindset shift for me of like, what if things are happening for me rather than to me? And just kind of starting to think about what it was that I was learning from each maybe not so great interaction or from a feeling that I had or on your journey. Do you have like a point in your story where you feel like you had that like pivotal mindset shift that maybe caused you to take more action than you had been taking?
I don't know if I had one pivotal
It's an evolving
mindset shift. I would say that it's actually about not taking action. I would say that has been the most profound. We don't need to move through our life. Go, go, go. We just talked about that. The profound is in the pause. I think the reason why a lot of people had a lot of struggle during this last year is because it was a forced pause. And I think a lot of people hadn't found tools to be able to sit with all of the discomfort that came up. And that's okay because I have gone through the same thing. Interestingly enough, my pause was I had resigned from a job that I had been working at. I was at a company for almost 8 years and I finally resigned. And so that was in the summer of 2018. So for about a year and a half so maybe it was almost, a year and a half basically, until the pandemic, I had been in a forced pause. While everyone was going to their jobs, I had no job. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I had no plan. I was dealing with a lot of physical health issues. I didn't have a partner at the time, until I did for part of it. But for a good part of it, I did not.
Mm-hmm.
And that forced me, because I won't say that I chose it. Many of us don't choose these moments, but it forced me to sit with my feelings, and it forced me to turn inward, and it forced me to slow down, and it forced me to not numb out.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a lot of things to numb out during that time. I would watch TV, but when that didn't work anymore, that's when nature called me. And I answered the call. Yeah. If anyone is listening and they are struggling right now, I guarantee you that if you turn and orient yourself towards the natural world, you will feel better. And guess what? It's free. And we've biologically evolved to be in connection with our environment. Mm-hmm. Only in the last 10,000 years have we been disconnected. We have 13 billion, let me say that again, billion years of evolution to be in our environment. Yeah. And in the last 10,000 years, we have disconnected from it. And if it were working, we wouldn't be as sick and as unhappy as we are. So if it's not working, where do we turn? Well, we turn back to where we've evolved. We turn back to where we came from, to our foundation, which is nature. Yeah. We are part of it. Yeah. It is a part of us. It's as simple and as profound and as challenging as that. It's simple and challenging.
It's simple because in concept, it does seem so easy. And yet, I think like so many other things, what's easy to do is also easy not to do. And it takes a conscious effort. And I think that that's always a constant reminder for people, is that it's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing to listen to yourself and to actually do it and to make it a priority.
100%. And that's why it's simple and challenging. And it goes against the grain of society. Mm-hmm. To turn to nature is a radical act, because you're going against everything that we've been taught. No, we should block out nature. No, we should dominate nature as humans. It's a very human-centric view to think that we are more important than any other species. It's completely made up. Yeah. It has no basis in reality. So to go against this grain and to choose this path is not easy. And that's why I created what I've created with Our Nature. Like, sort of my umbrella company is Our Nature Studio, but within that I have my podcast, and I have a course, and I have workshops. And the reason why I did that is because, like you said, it's one thing to understand that. It's another thing to actually do it and to experience the profound transformation and the moments of joy and calm and presence and freedom that you get with nature. You need a guide. Mm-hmm. You need a supportive community. If it were that easy, it's outside our door. Everyone, we should all do it. It's not like conceptually that hard. But we do need help with this, because we've been conditioned into it. And so we need support to remove all of those layers of conditioning and get back. So that's what I've done with my company, because I wanted that. I wanted a guide. I wanted someone to kind of hold my hand and walk me back to nature and then back home to myself in the process.
I know you have a new program coming up that is for Return to Nature. And I would love for you to tell my audience a little bit about that. I think it's going to really connect with where a lot of them kind of are in their transitional, transformational journeys. And I think it's a really cool way to have someone help you learn how to connect back to the natural world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my course, I have a new course. It's called Homecoming. And I called it that because, like I've said on the show so far, we are a part of nature. We come from the earth. So when we return back to the earth, we return home. We return home to where our body, physical body, likes to be, and our spirit and our soul and our essence. And that's why I called it Homecoming. It, sort of the one sentence is like, return to nature, come home to yourself. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of story behind the name. But deeper than that, I created this course for people in moments of transition. I mean, which is what your whole podcast is about. Because we're always, the only true thing that we know is that life is full of change. That's actually the only thing we can rely on, is that there's going to be constant change. And if that's a fact, if there's always going to be change, there's always going to be things to navigate, there's always going to be so much out of our control, then what we can control is our experience of all of these things. And what Homecoming does is it guides you back to the natural world. And in doing so, in having that felt experience and that connection to the truth of who you are, that's outside of your mind, outside of your ego, that's when you begin to build an inner resilience, an inner stability, and also have the tools to, when the storm rushes in and when the weather comes, you become like the mountain and you're stable and you're steady. And so the course is for people in transition who are looking for clarity. And when you create that deeper connection with nature, when you cultivate that, you connect to your intuition, your inner nature, to your essence, and then all the answers start to appear. It's amazing what happens. You don't need like fancy, you don't need to find all these answers outside of you. They're all within you. You become your own healer. You become your own guide. What I do as a guide is I walk you back to the natural world and just let it reveal to you what is waiting for you to discover.
So if they're interested in learning more about your course, how do they find you? How do they connect with you?
Yes. So Homecoming is, I'm currently in the process of filling some spots. I have only 4 spots left. It starts in September. I do want to say like a bit about the construction of the program. It starts in September with a 4-day retreat in upstate New York, followed by a 6-week course. It's going to be amazing. I'm so excited for it. There's only 4 spots left. So if you are interested, if this is like, if something in what I'm saying, you're sort of like nodding your head and you're like, yes, I feel like something's missing and I'm ready to have some clarity and ready to be able to navigate my life full of transitions with more ease and more joy and more resilience. And I want those answers and I know they are within me, but I don't know how to get them. Then let's get on the phone. So I'll leave a link and I can send you a link to include in the show notes. Yeah, if people want to reach out. But basically, I have a phone call with people. And the reason why I do that is because this course is not for everyone. You have to be ready. And because it's such a small group, I really want to make sure it's a group that I really want to curate the group and make sure that it's a right fit on both sides. So that's why I asked for you to hop on a call. I think people get scared to hop on calls. They're like, this is not like a sales pitch. I'm not going to like talk you into the program if it's not right for you. There's a lot of people that I've been like, no, it's not right. But it does require like a conversation. So yeah, we'll hop on the phone. We'll talk about it. I'll hear about where you're at and figure out if it's a good fit.
I love that. I'm really excited for people to learn more. And you guys should also go check out her podcast, Our Nature, because it's definitely one of the most relaxing podcasts I think I listen to.
Thank you. That's so sweet. I mean, yeah, if anyone, if you want to learn about my course and about the podcast, you can just go to ournaturepodcast.com. Pretty straightforward.
Awesome.
And it has all the info about the homecoming course, all my previous episodes. You can kind of binge and dive in.
Yeah. So I like to wrap up every conversation with one of my favorite questions. And that's because I think as a generation, we are not very good at giving ourselves credit for when we have really navigated something really hard and come out on the other side of it. So if you look back a year from now, what do you think you'll be most proud of yourself?
Again, I feel like I'm going to repeat myself, but I would say that I am most proud of the fact that my external life is still unpredictable. I don't have a full-time steady job. I'm a freelancer. I'm also building Our Nature, continuing to grow that. I'm not a full-time entrepreneur. I'm not going to, I want people to hear that. Mm-hmm. It's okay to have a job that pays you so that you can continue to build what you love. And I'm doing that. I'm on my path. I do hope that in maybe a year's time, I'll be able to walk away from freelance and do Our Nature full time, but that's not my reality right now, and that's totally okay. So what I'm most proud of is that my life is full of unknowns, and I don't know where sometimes my next job is going to come in, and I don't know what's going to happen with Our Nature. I don't have a 5-year business plan. Just like nature, I'm letting it reveal itself to me, and I'm trusting my intuition and following the flow. It doesn't mean I'm not intentional, but I'm most proud of the way that I've navigated the seasons of my life in the last year and done it with grace and presence and humility and surrender and gratitude. And I think that's all we can ever hope for.
I would agree. I think those are all things that we are all striving for every day. Thank you so much for taking time to share your story with us. I have learned so much. I really hope that you guys will take some time to connect with Alyssa over on social, check out Our Nature, and also be sure to check out her homecoming retreat. I think it's going to be something truly special. So on that note, friends, it has been lovely. I hope to see you all back here same time next week. Just wanted to say a quick thank you for coming to hang with me for a bit today. If today's conversation vibed with you, I would so appreciate if you took a few seconds to subscribe, rate, and review. This really helps to get the podcast into the hands of new listeners. For show notes and links to all resources discussed in today's conversation, head on over to butwhatifyoudidpod.com/listen now. Remember, friends, it's truly on us to inspire the next generation of changemakers. So I'll leave you with a little food for thought. It's one thing to change our world. It's another to change the future.